Welcome, dear listener. You found yourself here, at the edge of time. Tonight, you'll drift backward through the centuries, into the silent stone corridors and incense-scented sanctuaries of ancient Egypt. This is not the Egypt of bustling markets or mighty pharaohs at war. No, this is a slower Egypt, one of sacred rhythm, ritual, and reflection. This is the Egypt of the temple. Imagine yourself wrapped in the soft linen of the old world, the air warm but still heavy with the fragrance of myrrh and lotus. Before you, vast columns rise like petrified forests, each carved with hymns and gods who watch you silently from the stone. This is a place not for chaos, but for continuity. Not for noise, but for whispers. Each day within the temple followed the same rhythm, year after year, generation after generation. To the priests and servants, the temple was not just a place of worship, it was a world within a world, where time stood still and every action held divine meaning. In this 2-hour journey, we will explore that world. We'll begin by walking gently through the daily routines inside the temple, from the quiet footsteps of the morning rituals to the deepening hush of nightfall. Then, we'll meet some of the figures who shaped this sacred space, priests, kings, and ordinary workers whose lives were defined by the gods they served. We'll ponder the symbols, the mysteries, and the inner meanings of this silent architecture, and finally, we'll look beyond, at how the temple stood apart from the bustling towns outside, a place both central to life and strangely separate from it. And as we wander together, let the stillness of this ancient place soothe your thoughts. Let the slow rhythm of temple life quiet the busyness of your mind. The gods do not rush. Neither must we. Now, settle in. Let your breath slow. Let your eyelids grow heavy. And together, let's step quietly into the first chamber of our story. The temple begins to stir long before the sun crests the horizon. Imagine yourself walking along a path of hard-packed earth under a velvet sky, where the stars still linger and the Nile lies hidden behind the dunes. You approach the sacred complex, high walls looming in the dim light, their tops silhouetted against the pale pre-dawn. Everything is still. Even the birds are silent. Only a few lamps flicker within, their golden light escaping briefly through the narrow slits of the massive outer gate. The temple is not open to the public. This is not a place of communal gathering or festive worship. It is the home of the gods, and like any home, it must be tended to with care and consistency. Every day. At the heart of this sacred compound, hidden behind layers of stone and silence, rests the naos, the inner sanctum, the most sacred space. It houses the image of the god, often a small statue, clothed and decorated in finery. But before any human may step foot into this holiest of rooms, the temple itself must be awakened. The first to enter is the high priest, or in smaller temples, a ranking official acting in his stead. He must be pure, not merely in body, but in spirit. The purification process begins at the temple's edge, near the sacred lake or basin, where the cool water reflects the last stars of night. He washes his hands, mouth, and body, murmuring the ancient incantations that cleanse not just dirt, but disorder. Only once cleansed may he pass through the gates. Inside, the darkness is nearly complete. Stone upon stone rises around him. The floor is cold beneath bare feet. The air smells faintly of incense, dust, and the lingering perfume of yesterday's offerings. Slowly, methodically, the day begins. The opening of the shrine is the first major act. A group of attending priests follow the high priest in near silence. They carry torches and small instruments. Sistra used to softly summon the divine presence. Step by step, they approach the naos. But before opening the doors, the god must be greeted. The high priest chants in measured tones, speaking to the divine statue as if awakening a beloved but distant monarch. The words are not improvised. They are centuries old, memorized, passed down. With reverence, the shrine is opened. And then begins the daily care of the god. Imagine now the gentle rhythm of this divine housekeeping. The statue is bathed in perfumed water and dried with fine linen. Oils are applied, frankincense, cedar, and myrrh. Clean robes are wrapped around the figure, adorned with sacred amulets and fresh jewelry. The smell of ancient perfume fills the air. Each action is a prayer. Each gesture carries symbolic meaning. Washing the statue is not just a chore, it is a cosmic act, reaffirming harmony between the world of gods and men. Next come the offerings. In long rows, clay dishes are laid out with bread, onions, fresh fruits, beer, and meat, even though the god, of course, does not eat in the way humans do. The food will later be redistributed to the temple staff. But the gesture matters. It is about honoring, about establishing balance, Marat, the great order. Incense is burned in front of the god's image. The smoke rises slowly in the still air, twisting like a silver snake toward the high ceiling. And then, as gently as the doors were opened, they are closed once more. The god, dressed and satisfied, is left to rest in the silence. But the temple is far from done. Beyond the central sanctuary, life pulses quietly through its many rooms and halls. Scribes begin their work in small side chambers, copying hymns, recording donations, tallying livestock from temple-owned fields. Temple complexes were more than spiritual centers. They were economic powerhouses, controlling vast tracts of land, flocks, and labor. In another chamber, low-voiced recitations of medical texts echo from a small group of priest-physicians. The temple also served as a place of healing. Remedies, often a mix of practical and spiritual methods, were stored here, honey and resin for wounds, spells against fever, prayers for fertility. The storehouses bustle quietly too. Workers move among amphorae of oil, grain baskets, and racks of scrolls. Offerings are sorted and stored, some to be consumed by temple workers, others prepared for redistribution to the poor or for future ceremonies. And then, beyond the walls of the temple, the people wait. Ordinary Egyptians are not permitted inside. But they come anyway, day after day, gathering outside the gates with small offerings, flowers, tokens, little clay statues. They whisper prayers to the stone walls, hoping the gods will hear them from within. Some leave messages etched into nearby stones, "May Amun favor my crops," or "Protect my child in childbirth." Priests may emerge to offer short blessings, to accept the humble offerings of farmers and fishermen. But always, the interior remains reserved, a world apart. By midday, the rhythm shifts. The priests retreat for their own meals, often prepared from temple offerings. Others take over their duties. The temple must always be manned, always watched. There is no moment when it is truly asleep. Evening brings a second ritual cycle. The image of the god may be redressed, offerings refreshed, incense lit anew. Another round of prayers flows through the quiet corridors. And then, as the sun sets, the temple is gently sealed once more. The god sleeps. Outside, the wind stirs the palms. The last priest locks the gates, and silence settles over the complex like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow, it will all happen again. Exactly the same. This slow repetition is not dullness, it is devotion. It is the rhythm of eternity. As we leave this first glimpse into temple life behind, let us gently turn to a different kind of sacred figure, not the god, but the high priest himself. Who was he? How did he live, and what power did he hold, balancing between heaven and earth? As the first light of dawn touches the horizon, the high priest of the temple has already begun his quiet labor. You might imagine him stepping barefoot into the outer courtyard, linen robes falling softly around his ankles, his head shaved smooth in the ritual purity of his station. His face is composed, unhurried, marked not by pride but by the serenity of certainty. For in his hands lies not merely ceremonial duty, but the divine connection between the gods and the living. The high priest, known in many temples by titles such as Hemnet Jetepi, the first servant of the god, was far more than a religious figure. He was administrator, scholar, ritual master, and spiritual guardian. His day was filled not with dramatic displays of power, but with steady, deliberate acts of devotion, each one anchoring the temple to the cosmic order. He was rarely alone. Though he held the highest position within the temple hierarchy, he was part of a layered network of priests and temple workers. Beneath him were ranks of assistant priests, wab priests, or purification priests, who performed menial tasks but also upheld strict rules of cleanliness. Then came scribes, chant leaders, musicians, astrologers, keepers of sacred objects, and the silent functionaries who ensured the daily rituals unfolded as they must. But only the high priest could enter the deepest sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, and stand face to face with the God's image. Let us imagine a moment in his day. After purification at dawn, he walks the inner path through a sequence of gradually darkening halls. The thick scent of incense floats around him. The temple grows quieter with each step, more enclosed. The gods do not reside in the open, they live at the center, where darkness shelters mystery. He speaks softly as he goes, reciting litanies preserved for centuries. He arrives before the naos, the shrine. It is sealed with fine doors, decorated in gold leaf and hieroglyphic praise. Only he may open them. He chants a greeting, one of dozens memorized over years of training, and then slowly unveils the god. This is not performance. No audience watches. The ritual is for the god alone. He will cleanse, anoint, and clothe the statue, murmuring praises with each movement. The prayers are not spontaneous. They are scripted, inherited, unchanging. To stray from them would be to allow disorder, isfet, to slip in. After tending the god, the high priest performs another duty. He receives reports. Though his days begin in silence, they often end with words, consultations, accounts, scrolls. The temple is not just a place of spiritual activity but a center of wealth and economic control. The high priest oversees these with the same gravity he applies to his religious role. You see, temples were landlords. They owned vast tracts of farmland, herds of livestock, dozens, even hundreds, of workers. Tax grain flowed into temple storehouses. Priests had to manage irrigation schedules, harvests, animal births, and payments. It was not uncommon for a temple complex to resemble a small city in itself. And the high priest was at its center. He would sit in a shaded room, scrolls arrayed before him, a scribe beside him with a palette of ink and reed pens. In that calm space, he reviewed temple revenues, how much barley was collected, how much incense was needed for the month, how many workers were due compensation in bread and oil. The high priest, despite his elevated role, lived under constant scrutiny. Purity had to be maintained. Sexual activity was restricted. His diet was controlled. He could not wear foreign fabrics or eat unclean foods. Even his emotions were regulated, for anger or distraction might pollute his inner clarity. And yet, he was also a man. He might have had a family, children, perhaps a wife. In many periods of Egyptian history, priesthood was hereditary. Sons of priests were trained from a young age to follow in their father's footsteps, memorizing hymns, observing rituals, and learning the sacred calendar. The high priest's home would be orderly, modest but comfortable, close to the temple but separate, a place of quiet study and reflection. Occasionally, his role brought him before the pharaoh. Temples were vital to royal power. A loyal high priest ensured divine legitimacy for the king. Sometimes the king consulted the god through oracles or dreams facilitated by the priest. At festivals, the high priest might walk beside the pharaoh, holding a ceremonial staff, his face composed, his every step deliberate. But unlike the king, he was not a man of battle or courtly intrigue. His domain was timelessness. In many ways, he was more permanent than the king. Pharaohs died and were replaced. But the temple, the ritual, the god, remained the same. The high priest ensured that continuity, like a lighthouse keeper watching the flame night after night. By twilight, he returns once more to the sanctuary. The statue is disrobed, its jewelry removed. The god is spoken to again, gently. The chamber is darkened, and incense smoke curls lazily around the fading light. The doors close. The sanctuary returns to silence. And the high priest, walking slowly back through the halls, becomes just a man again, for now. Outside, as stars appear once more over the Nile, he gazes up in silence. The same stars that once watched over the great priests of Heliopolis and Karnak now hang above him. A thread of continuity stretching backward across the centuries, unbroken. Tomorrow, he will rise again before dawn. And the rhythm will resume. But before we follow him into another day, let us pause to step into something deeper, into the mysteries carved on temple walls and whispered in hidden rooms. For not all of temple life was visible or recorded. Some things were meant to remain hidden. Let us now explore the forgotten and symbolic, the secret world of temple symbolism, sacred writings, and magical rituals, in segment 3. Imagine standing alone in a great hyperstyle hall, where massive columns soar above you like stone trees in a sacred forest. The light is dim, falling in slanted rays through high clerestory windows. Dust dances quietly in the beams. You walk slowly forward, your steps echoing off ancient stone. Around you, every surface, walls, columns, lintels, ceilings, is covered in delicate carvings. Figures with the heads of birds and cats, men with outstretched arms, women with lotus flowers. Lines of hieroglyphs snake across every inch of stone like ancient incantations frozen in time. You are not simply walking through a building. You are moving through a coded world. The temple was never just a structure, it was a symbol in itself, designed to reflect the cosmos, to mirror creation, to embody the myths that formed the Egyptian understanding of reality. Each wall, each corridor, each ritual object carried meaning. But only a few could read it. Let us begin with the hieroglyphs. To the modern eye, they appear as beautiful pictures, stylized birds, reeds, suns, scarabs. But to a trained priest or scribe, they were much more than writing. Hieroglyphs were considered magical. Every sign, every shape held a divine resonance. To inscribe a name was to summon presence. To carve a prayer was to give it permanence. The very act of carving hieroglyphs into temple walls was a sacred task. The artisans who did it were not mere workers, they were often temple personnel themselves, initiated into the meanings behind the signs. Mistakes were rare. Precision was everything. The content of these texts ranged widely. Some recorded daily rituals, others recited creation myths, still others praised the gods, or detailed offerings, or noted royal decrees. Some inscriptions were meant only for the gods to read. Others served to teach new generations of priests. But hieroglyphs were only the surface layer. Beyond them lay a deeper system of symbolism, a visual language embedded into the architecture, art, and layout of the temple. Let us step outside and examine the temple from above, in your mind's eye. It is not random. Its alignment, orientation, dimensions, all were carefully chosen. Most temples were oriented to the east, where the sun rose. This was not simply practical. It was symbolic. The eastern gate welcomed the rebirth of the sun, just as the daily rituals welcomed the god into waking life. The journey from the entrance to the sanctuary mirrored the journey of creation. You began in the light, the outer courtyard, where ordinary life still had some place. As you moved deeper, the halls narrowed, darkened. You entered the primordial darkness, the time before creation. At the very center, within the naos, stood the god statue, representing the first moment of existence, the birth of light from darkness. Even the columns around you were not just supports. They were modeled after papyrus reeds, symbols of life and regeneration. The ceilings above often depicted stars, or boats sailing across the sky, echoing the journey of the sun god Ra through the heavens. And what of the secret rituals? Not every ceremony was witnessed. Some took place deep in the temple, behind sealed doors, attended by only a few. Among these were the daily rituals of the god, which we've touched upon, but also rituals of transformation, protection, and renewal. Some involved symbolic reenactments of myth, the death of Osiris, the triumph of Horus, the restoration of Ma'at. One of the most mysterious was the opening of the mouth ceremony. Though more often associated with tombs and funerary rites, this ritual could also be performed within temple walls on statues. It was meant to awaken the object, to make it capable of receiving offerings, hearing prayers, and interacting with the divine world. Priests would touch sacred tools to the lips, eyes, and ears of the statue while chanting. They used instruments shaped like adzes, symbolic spoons, or even sacred blades. Each motion was deliberate. The statue, though stone, was treated as alive. Not metaphorically, but ritually. But how did the priests know all of this? How were these complex ceremonies remembered, generation after generation? The answer lies in another sacred space, the House of Life, or Parank. Often attached to major temples, the House of Life functioned as a combination library, school, and scriptoria. Here, priest-scribes trained in the sacred arts. They copied scrolls onto papyrus. Medical texts, hymns, spells, ritual guides. Some were practical, others deeply esoteric. These rooms were filled with quiet focus, the soft rustle of reed pens on papyrus, the murmured sounds of memorization. A young initiate might spend years here, learning to interpret dream omens, diagnose spiritual afflictions, or conduct the proper calendar rituals for lunar festivals. The House of Life was a living memory, preserving centuries of knowledge, some of which we no longer fully understand today. And then there was the statue of the god itself. It was not a symbol of the god. It was, ritually speaking, the god incarnate. Once consecrated and placed in the naos, it became the deity's physical presence on earth. No one, except the highest-ranked priests, could see it. Its face remained hidden from the public, always. It was clothed, fed, sung to, protected. To the Egyptians, gods were not distant cosmic abstractions. They lived among the people, quite literally, in their temples. The rituals were not symbolic gestures. They were essential, keeping balance between the mortal world and the divine. And still, there were layers of mystery that even many priests did not penetrate. The temple, with its high stone walls and sacred silence, might seem like a world entirely apart from the bustling villages and farmsteads of ancient Egypt. And in many ways, it was. Few Egyptians would ever step inside its deepest chambers, and fewer still would ever lay eyes upon the statue of a god. But that did not mean the temple was removed from daily life. On the contrary, it cast a long and constant shadow over the lives of ordinary people, spiritually, economically, and socially. Imagine yourself as a humble villager, waking just before sunrise in a house made of sun-dried mud brick. The Nile glimmers beyond your field, and the sky has only begun to pale. You offer a short prayer to the god of your town, perhaps Amun, or Atha, or Thoth, raising your hands as the priests do, though you have never seen them up close. Your village lies in the temple's orbit. Its walls rise far in the distance, but its presence is deeply felt. It is the source of ritual and protection, the keeper of the gods, and the place where fate is, in some unseen way, shaped. You cannot go inside, not truly, but you approach its gates with reverence. Perhaps today, you carry an offering. A small basket of dates. A clay figurine. A folded prayer written on a shard of pottery. You join others who have gathered there, fishermen, farmers, mothers with young children. They come not to see the god, but to be seen by the god. A lesser priest might meet you at the outer court or through a side gate. He accepts your offering with soft words, thanks you, and promises to place it in the god's presence. Whether or not it truly reaches the sanctuary, you believe your devotion is recognized. And that belief gives comfort. The temple offers you more than spiritual guidance. It provides employment. Many in your village work for the temple, not as priests, but as bakers, butchers, weavers, brewers, groundskeepers, and laborers. Some tend livestock in the temple's fields. Others deliver grain or repair mud-brick walls. Children may be apprenticed to temple scribes, learning to read and copy sacred texts. In this way, the temple is an economic anchor. Its lands stretch across the countryside, and its wealth rivals that of the pharaoh himself. It stores grain during famine, distributes oil, maintains workshops. It may even act as a bank, where goods are deposited, tracked, and loaned with careful records etched onto clay tablets or written in black ink on scrolls. Some days, temple festivals open the gates, just a little. During great celebrations such as the beautiful Feast of the Valley, the statue of the god is carried out in a ceremonial bark. Priests, musicians, dancers, and nobles join the procession. The people watch with wide eyes and wonder. Incense billows. Offerings line the streets. Songs are sung, and joy spreads like a soft breeze across the land. On these days, the temple feels close. Almost within reach. You, the villager, might follow the procession, perhaps even catch a glimpse of the glittering canopy hiding the god's form. You throw flowers or clap as the bark passes. It is a moment of communion, however brief. And then, the temple gates close again. Yet even behind those gates, the temple serves you. If you are ill, you might send word to a temple physician who uses both natural remedies and sacred chants. If you are anxious about a dream, you might seek interpretation from a priest trained in dream analysis. If you are burdened by guilt, you may whisper a prayer through the walls, trusting the god to hear. At the threshold, the stone lions that flank the doorway seem to watch, but not unkindly. The doors remain sealed, but the scent of incense sometimes drifts out, carried on the morning air. And that is enough. Because for the common person, the temple is not about access. It is about presence. It is a place of stability in a shifting world. A world where the Nile rises and falls, where harvests succeed or fail, where families grow and elders die. The temple does not change. Its rituals do not shift. Its prayers are not improvised. That steadiness is deeply comforting. Some villages carry amulets blessed by priests, small tokens shaped like eyes, scarabs, or lotus buds. Others hang papyrus scrolls with protective spells near their doors. All of it points back to the temple, even if the path there is indirect. And in your own house, when you light a small oil lamp at night, the flame reminds you of the eternal flame kept burning inside the temple's sanctuary, hidden from view, but never extinguished. You may not be a priest, or a noble, or a scribe. but you are not forgotten. The God's gaze, you believe, sees through stone. And your prayers, though small, rise like incense into the unseen. As we now step away from the outer gates and return within the temple's interior, let us pause to consider the wider environment around it. Not just the people, but the landscape itself, its sacred rivers, temple gardens, and the carefully managed connection between the natural world and the sacred one. Join me now as we wander gently into segment 5, where we explore the temple grounds and the rhythm of nature that flowed quietly around the stone. The temple may have been built from stone, enduring, solemn, and cold, but it did not stand alone in a lifeless landscape. Surrounding many of Egypt's temples were spaces of cultivated beauty, gardens, groves, sacred lakes, and fields. These outdoor spaces were not mere ornamentation. They were carefully shaped extensions of the temple's sanctity, connecting earth to sky, water to desert, and life to the gods. Let us begin at the edge of the sacred water. Imagine yourself standing beside a still, rectangular lake, its surface smooth as polished obsidian in the early light. A faint mist hovers over the water, and the reeds lining its perimeter rustle softly in the breeze. This is the sacred lake, or Shinetja, an integral part of many temple complexes. Its waters were not for recreation. They were for purification. Before any ritual could begin, priests bathed here, washing away the invisible residue of daily life, dust, distraction, disorder. The water was drawn and used to cleanse objects, altars, and offerings. At sunrise, its mirrored surface caught the first rays of the sun, linking it symbolically to rebirth and cosmic renewal. Sacred lakes were often bordered by pathways or shaded by palms. Some were surrounded by low mud brick walls, others by flowering bushes and fruit trees, planted deliberately, not only for beauty, but for meaning. The lotus flower, for example, was a powerful symbol of rebirth, rising clean each morning from muddy water. Papyrus, too, held sacred associations, its tall stalks once thought to have lined the primordial marshes from which the world was created. And so, temple gardeners tended these groves and beds with quiet reverence. Their tools were simple: reed baskets, stone hoes, clay pots for water, but their task was not. They cultivated ritual plants, many of which were used in ceremonies or offerings. Myrrh, frankincense, henna, mandrake, and sycamore fig were grown where possible, or brought from afar. These were not ordinary crops. They were gifts for the gods, carefully harvested, prepared, and delivered with prayer. Imagine now a temple garden in full bloom. There are walkways shaded by date palms and acacias. Bees hum lazily in the warm air. Pools filled with lilies shimmer under the sun. The scent of citrus blossoms, crushed mint, and warm earth mingles in the air. You walk slowly, your hand trailing over the soft leaves of a fig tree. This is not a place for labor. It is a place for quiet restoration, for the god, for the priests, and perhaps for the world itself. The temple's outer walls often bore carvings of these very plants, as if to reinforce the idea that the beauty of nature, when ordered and understood, was an extension of divine harmony. Beyond the garden, a little further out, lie the storehouses and granaries. These are less poetic but no less essential. Mud brick buildings with thick walls kept grain cool and protected from rodents and rot. Workers loaded baskets of barley and emmer wheat through narrow doorways, recording each delivery on ostraca, fragments of pottery used like notepads. These stores sustained the priests, supported temple festivals, and could feed nearby villages during famine. The movement of goods here was quiet but constant. Elsewhere, behind high walls or just outside them, animals were tended. Cattle, geese, ducks, and goats grazed in small enclosures or paddled through irrigation channels. Their care, too, was sacred. Some were destined for sacrifice, not in a brutal or casual way, but as carefully chosen, ritually purified offerings. Others provided milk, eggs, or wool for temple use. The keepers worked diligently, cleaning stalls, preparing feed, and ensuring the animals remained unblemished. Not far off, bees hummed over woven hives. Their wax was used for candles and seals, their honey offered to the gods or stirred into medicinal mixtures. And in a shaded area, sheltered from the sun, potters and craftsmen worked in slow rhythm. They shaped offering vessels, incense burners, and small statues. Their hands were skilled, their movements practiced, their creations meant not for trade, but for ritual purpose. A simple clay bowl made here might later carry water to bathe a god's image. A small sculpture might be placed before a shrine, never to be moved again. All of this? The water, the trees, the grain, the animals, the tools, formed an intricate ecology of worship. The temple was not isolated. It breathed with the land around it. And yet, there was a boundary. Outside the temple's fields lay the desert, a place of danger, of wild spirits, of unpredictability. Inside was the ordered world, shaped by human hands to mirror divine intent. This contrast was not accidental. It was fundamental to Egyptian thought. Chaos outside, order within. Even the birds had their place. The ibis, sacred to Thoth, was often seen near temple ponds. The falcon, associated with Horus, circled silently above. The presence of these creatures was not only noted, it was read. Omens were sometimes drawn from their patterns, their calls, their comings and goings. As day stretches on, the temple grounds become warm, then hot. The shadows shorten. The scent of flowers grows sweeter in the heat. Workers seek shade under low awnings. Bees retreat to their hives. But the temple does not pause. Inside, the priests continue their chants. Outside, the cycle of tending and preparing continues. And when the sun begins to descend, its last light reflects off the sacred lake once more, turning the water gold. A gentle breeze picks up. The garden stirs. The plants whisper in the twilight. And the temple settles, as it always has. Day fades, but eternity does not. In the quiet of this cultivated space, we begin to understand the temple not only as a building, but as a world entire. A place where even the smallest blossom had meaning. Where nature was not wilderness, but ritual in bloom. And as we now leave the soft hush of the garden behind, let us walk once again toward the heart of the temple. For while the ground around the temple is tended and serene, the stone halls within hold layers of memory, tales of kings, of war, of gifts given and honors claimed. Let us now enter segment 6, where we explore the temple as a monument to Pharaoh. A silent tribute to earthly power and divine favor, carved in stone. As we pass from the serene gardens and sacred lakes into the deeper recesses of the temple, we begin to feel the weight of stone and silence around us. The outer courtyards, once bright with sun and motion, now give way to cool corridors, immense walls, and towering pylons. Shadows stretch across the floor, and the air holds a stillness untouched by time. This is the heart of the temple, not only a place of worship, but a monument to kingship. To walk here is to walk through memory carved in stone. Let us pause at the base of a great pylon, the massive gateway that marks the temple's entrance. Two sloping towers, joined by a central doorway, rise high above us. The stone is pale in the morning light, but streaked with the marks of centuries. Across its surface, scenes unfold in rows of chiseled artistry. A pharaoh, young and vigorous, lifts a mace to strike down enemies. Around him, gods stand approvingly. Symbols of power, ankh, scepters, crowns, surround his figure. This is not simply decoration. It is declaration. The pharaoh is more than a ruler. He is the link between the heavens and the earth, the human embodiment of divine will. His strength, his victories, his generosity to the gods, all are recorded here so that no one, not even eternity, will forget. The temple, then, is his witness. As we pass through the pylon into the first courtyard, we are greeted by rows of colossal statues. Each bears the unmistakable features of the king, idealized, unaging, serene. Some wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Others hold crooks and flails, symbols of guardianship and rule. Even in silence, they command presence. One might think these statues were made to honor a king already long dead. But often, these carvings were made during the pharaoh's lifetime, his deeds recorded as prophecy fulfilled, his reign already cast in eternal stone. To walk through the temple was to be reminded of his Ma'at, the divine balance he upheld. And so we find inscriptions not only of battles won, but of gifts given. Carvings show the pharaoh offering incense, water, bread, and gold to the gods. These are symbolic acts, repeated again and again on the walls of sanctuaries and side chambers. They show piety, not just power. For the king was expected not only to rule men, but to serve the gods. The more he gave, the more Egypt was blessed. And this gift-giving wasn't mere flattery. Many of the treasures offered in the temple, gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, lapis from Afghanistan, truly were brought to Egypt through trade or conquest. The king's triumphs abroad fed the temple's magnificence at home. Every object placed here had its story, and each story led back to the king. Let us now walk slowly through one of the hypostyle halls, vast chambers filled with towering columns. These pillars, carved with hieroglyphs and crowned with lotus or papyrus capitals, feel like a forest of stone. Light filters in from above, illuminating dust motes and golden edges of reliefs. The walls around us speak in glyphs and figures. Here, scribes recorded not only the king's offerings but his lineage, his building projects, his royal titles, often in long, formal phrases that echoed across generations. These texts were both history and prayer. Sometimes, the king's name was carved inside a cartouche, an oval loop that symbolized eternity. It protected his identity and secured his memory. But when one dynasty was overthrown, the new ruler might return and chisel out his predecessor's name, replacing it with his own. Erasure and rewriting, acts of memory and power, played out in the temple's very fabric. Not all inscriptions were for public display. In hidden corners, behind pillars or above doors, we sometimes find small, personal graffiti. A workman's name. A prayer scratched by a priest. A mark left by a visitor in awe. Even in this place of kings, ordinary lives left their whispers. Now we come to the festival court. Many temples hosted grand events in honor of both gods and kings. The said festival, for example, was a renewal ritual held after a pharaoh had ruled for 30 years. Statues were paraded, offerings flowed, chants rang through the stone chambers, and the king, dressed in full regalia, reenacted the unification of Egypt. Temples would be filled with banners, perfumes, songs, and pilgrims. But long after the voices faded, the stone remembered. Reliefs show us these festivals in detail, the drums, the dances, the hymns. The pharaoh, in the center, ever regal, ever divine. Let us pause here and sit in the shadow of one such relief. The carving is worn, but still clear. A king steps forward, hands outstretched, offering a vessel of incense. Behind him, a procession of priests carry sacred symbols. Above, the winged sun disk hovers, a sign of protection. It is silent now, but the moment lingers, preserved for thousands of years. The temple, then, is not just a place to honor gods. It is a book of kingship, written not in ink, but in stone and shadow. Every corner bears the fingerprints of pharaohs long gone. Their stories are here not just to be read, but to be felt, breathed in, remembered. And as we rise from this spot and move deeper still into the temple's inner spaces, the stone grows darker, the passages narrower, the carvings more sacred. For we are approaching the sanctuary, the holiest of holies, the heart of the temple, the dwelling place of the God himself. Let us proceed now to segment 7, where the rituals of divinity are performed behind closed doors, and where only the purest may step. We now find ourselves at the threshold of the most sacred chamber of all. After passing through the towering pylons, quiet courtyards, and forest-like hypostyle halls, we come at last to the very heart of the temple complex, the sanctuary, or as it was known in ancient Egyptian, the naos. It is here, hidden deep within layers of stone, that the god resided. Let us pause at the entrance. This space is not large. It is not adorned with the grand colonnades or processional ways we passed before. Instead, the sanctuary is small, silent, and steeped in shadow. It was never meant for crowds, or even for most priests. Only the high priest, often the pharaoh himself or one appointed in his stead, could enter here. And only after ritual purification, careful preparation, and the recitation of sacred words. Inside the sanctuary, the air feels heavier, not from dust, but from memory. Imagine the room lit only by the flicker of oil lamps or slivers of dawn light from narrow openings high above. The walls are covered with scenes of gods and kings exchanging blessings, surrounded by hieroglyphs of prayer and offering. Even the ceiling is painted with stars, an echo of the night sky above, to remind all who entered that this room bridged the earth and the heavens. At the center stands a shrine, a stone or wooden structure, often gilded, its doors shut tight. Within it rests the sacred statue of the god. This was no ordinary image. It was not merely symbolic or artistic. In the belief of the ancient Egyptians, it was the literal presence of the deity. When the statue was ritually awakened, clothed, and fed by the high priest, it was as though the god himself stirred from slumber, received the gifts of mortals, and responded in kind. This daily ritual was called the opening of the mouth ceremony. Though it sounds poetic, it was taken quite literally. The high priest would recite ancient incantations and perform precise gestures, tapping the statue's lips, eyes, and ears with ritual tools, symbolically awakening its senses so it might see, hear, and speak. Each morning, the god was bathed with sacred water, anointed with perfumed oil, dressed in fresh linen, and adorned with jewels. Food was laid before him, loaves of bread, cuts of meat, fruits, and beer. Incense filled the room with thick, fragrant smoke. Music might be played, softly, on harps and flutes, though never by human hand in this chamber. Often, music was left to the echoes of the halls outside. Then, as silently as it began, the rite concluded. The doors of the shrine were closed. The god had been honored. The divine presence, appeased. This ritual was repeated every single day, without fail. Storm or drought, war or peace, the god must be served. If the rite stopped, it was believed the balance of Ma'at, order, truth, and cosmic harmony might falter. Egypt's prosperity depended not only on floods and harvests, but on this sacred daily rhythm. Not all temples housed the same gods. At Karnak, it was Amun-Ra. At Edfu, it was Horus the falcon god. At Dendera, the beautiful Atha. Each deity had a temple designed for their unique rituals, but the structure of reverence was remarkably consistent across centuries. Some sanctuaries were built atop earlier ones, layer upon layer of belief. Others were recarved and reconsecrated by new rulers. Yet despite these changes, the core practice endured a space of silence, secrecy, and sacred duty. Let us step back now from the sanctuary and consider its symbolic weight. This room, though small, was a cosmic center. The floor represented the earth, the ceiling the sky, and the walls the mountains that framed the world. The statue within was not just a representation of the god, it was the god. And the temple, in its entirety, was a mirror of the universe. Every element, from the axial alignment with the rising sun, to the use of specific stone types, to the echoing design of chambers, was chosen with care. The further you moved inward, the more sacred the space became. The temple was not built horizontally alone, it was built spiritually, layer by layer, from the profane to the divine. Even the names of the rooms mattered. The hall before the sanctuary might be called the Hall of Appearances. Side chambers could be houses of the morning or chambers of rebirth. Each played a part in the ritual drama that unfolded daily. And then, once a year, the statue would leave. During special festivals, such as the beautiful Festival of the Valley or the Feast of Opit, the god statue would be taken from the sanctuary, placed in a portable shrine, and paraded through the streets on a ceremonial bark. People gathered by the thousands. Drums and cymbals rang out. The god traveled by river or on foot to another temple, to visit with another deity, or to bless the people. But once the journey ended, the god returned to this dark, quiet, holy space. The sanctuary doors closed again. And the cycle resumed. Now, as we sit for a moment in the cool hush outside the sanctuary chamber, we may reflect on the quiet endurance of this place. The rituals have long ceased. The statues are gone. Yet the rooms still feel sacred. The stones still whisper of devotion. In our next segment, we will leave the central chambers and explore the temple's outer zones, the storerooms, libraries, workshops, and daily bustle that supported this sacred world. For even holiness needs kitchens, scribes, and laundry. Let us continue to segment 8, where the unseen hands of the temple come to light. We now step away from the serene hush of the sanctuary and move into a part of the temple often overlooked by time and memory, the logistical heart of the divine. Though the gods were served in shadowy inner chambers, the preparation for their daily rituals required a vast, coordinated effort that rippled through dozens of interconnected rooms, corridors, and courtyards. Let us begin with the storerooms. Tucked behind thick walls and tucked between sacred halls, these spaces were both warehouse and pantry. You might imagine rows of low stone shelves, stacks of amphorae filled with perfumed oil, baskets brimming with grain, loaves of temple bread laid out to cool, and jars of honey sealed with mud caps. This was where the divine meals were prepared, not for consumption by mortals, but for the gods themselves. While the food was ritually offered in the sanctuary, it did not vanish. After the god had received its essence, the physical meal would be redistributed to the priests or stored again. Nothing was wasted. A temple was both a religious site and an economic engine, and these storerooms were its vaults. Walk a little further and you'll find rooms full of linen. Egyptian temples, especially those dedicated to solar deities, were lavish in their use of fine linen, pure, white, and symbolic of divine light. The god statue would be dressed daily in fresh robes. But those robes had to be spun, woven, washed, and stored. So somewhere behind the columns and altars were laundering chambers and textile workshops. Priests weren't necessarily the ones doing the cleaning. That task was likely assigned to trained workers, some of them temple servants, others possibly conscripted laborers or even families whose duty it was, generation after generation, to provide clean cloth to the gods. Now picture a cool, narrow corridor filled not with food or fabric, but with scrolls. This is the temple library. Far from the chaotic scrawl of modern libraries, the Egyptian temple archive was orderly and sacred. Scrolls of papyrus were carefully rolled and tied with linen or papyrus string. They were stored in wooden chests or wall niches, each labeled with the name of the text or its purpose. These texts were not for storytelling, they were manuals of magic, of astronomy, of architecture, and of ritual. Some scrolls contained hymns and prayers. Others detailed the correct timing of ceremonies, based on the movement of stars and the lunar calendar. Still others were administrative, lists of donations, records of land holdings, or inventories of temple cattle. Because you see, temples did not just serve the gods. They owned land. Vast tracts of fertile farmland, in fact. They employed thousands of workers, from cooks to dancers, stonecutters to scribes. They had their own granaries, their own vineyards, even their own fleets of boats for ferrying goods along the Nile. A large temple like Karnak or Edfu could be the wealthiest institution in the region, rivaling even the royal court. The priests who managed all this were not monks living in seclusion. They were trained administrators, scholars, and economists. Their world extended far beyond the inner sanctum. They tracked harvests, taxed farmers, and negotiated with traders. Some priests rose to such power that they were more influential than governors. So while the god was being worshipped in silence, just a few halls away, a scribe might be tallying grain, a brewer stirring vats of beer, a shepherd counting sheep, or a stoneworker carving a new stele to commemorate a festival. Let us not forget the workshops. Temples employed highly skilled artisans, goldsmiths, lapidaries, perfumers, and sculptors. Some rooms were filled with the delicate scent of myrrh and cinnamon, where sacred oils were mixed in careful proportions. Others echoed with the soft clink of stone on stone as workers carved miniature statues, amulets, or furniture for the god's chamber. In one corner, a man might be shaping wax figures for ritual magic. In another, an apprentice quietly learns how to trace hieroglyphs on fresh papyrus. These artisans worked not for profit, but for divine favor. Their creations weren't sold at market. They were used in rituals, buried in temple caches, or burned as part of offerings. We also find spaces dedicated to music and dance. Though these performances rarely entered the sanctuary itself, they played an essential role in festivals. Temples employed musicians, flutists, harpists, and singers who trained in sacred hymns and performed during processions or evening rites. Dancers, too, performed in the outer courts, their movements considered offerings as vital as any loaf of bread or cup of wine. The temple was a living organism, full of movement and rhythm. While some rooms echoed with the chants of priests, others resounded with the creak of doors, the brush of linen, and the scratch of reed pens. Even the walls whispered. Scribes carved new inscriptions over older ones. Artists touched up fading paint. Workers swept the floors and repainted ceilings with stars and suns. To keep the god's house pristine was to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance. This sacred duty extended even to animals. In many temples, animals were kept and honored, from sacred cats to crocodiles, falcons, and bulls. Some temples kept fish in sacred ponds or tended to flocks of geese. These animals were not pets, but avatars, living symbols of divine presence. As we step back and consider the full operation of the temple, it becomes clear that behind the mystery of incense and prayers was a complex, well-oiled system, operating day and night. Ritual could not happen without record-keeping. Worship could not happen without laundry. The sacred required the mundane. And in the world of the Egyptians, there was no shame in that. Rather, there was harmony, each person, task, and stone part of a grand, eternal rhythm. In the next segment, we will explore that rhythm as it unfolds across the year, the festivals and feast days, when the gods emerged from their sanctuaries, and the quiet temple burst into color, music, and crowds. Let us now move gently to segment 9, where sacred silence gives way to sacred celebration. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of distant drums, the faint hum of chanting voices, the flash of sunlight on golden ornaments, and a crowd beginning to swell along the broad temple avenue. Today is no ordinary day. In the quiet, rhythmic life of the temple, most days are dedicated to routine rituals, carefully timed, precisely executed, hidden from the eyes of ordinary folk. But a few times each year, something remarkable occurred. The god left the sanctuary. And when that happened, the entire city knew. These were the festival days, holidays on a cosmic scale, when the boundaries between the divine and the human thinned, and the temple opened its arms to the public. Among the most famous of these was the beautiful Feast of the Valley, a celebration in Thebes where the statue of Amun, the mighty creator god, was carried across the Nile from the Karnak temple to the necropolis on the western bank. But this was no quiet boat ride. The procession began with fanfare. Priests in spotless white robes gathered at dawn, their bodies freshly shaved, their mouths purified with natron. Drummers, dancers, and musicians assembled in colorful rows. Standard-bearers hoisted tall banners depicting sacred symbols. The air was heavy with incense. And then, with careful reverence, the bark shrine was lifted. Imagine a gilded wooden shrine, shaped like a small boat, glimmering with gold leaf, inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian. Inside rested the hidden statue of the god, kept concealed behind a curtain or within a closed naos. Only the high priests had seen it, and only on the holiest days. The shrine was set upon the shoulders of strong priests, usually in groups of 16 to 24, and paraded out of the temple gates. The crowd erupted with cheers. Men threw flowers. Women ululated and clapped. Children clung to their parents' robes. The god was coming out to bless the people, to inspect his lands, to renew the world. Along the processional avenue, lined with sphinx statues and flanked by towering pylons, the crowd followed. Some held palm branches. Others offered food or sang hymns. The procession paused at stations of purification, small chapels along the way, where offerings were made, and priests performed short rites. Eventually, the bark was transferred to an actual boat, lavishly decorated, rowed across the river, and received on the western shore with just as much ceremony. There, the god visited the shrines of his ancestors, tombs, mortuary temples, and sacred hills. These were deeply symbolic moments. Just as the sun traveled through the underworld at night and rose again, so too did the god reenact death and rebirth. And by doing so, he brought that renewal to all of Egypt. Other festivals followed similar rhythms. In Edfu, the Feast of the Triumph of Horus was reenacted annually. This involved a dramatic retelling of Horus's mythical victory over Set, the god of chaos. Statues were carried in procession, boats glided down the Nile, and sacred dramas were performed by temple actors in carefully choreographed movements. During the Opit festival in Thebes, a Mun statue would travel from Karnak to Luxor temple, accompanied by sacred dancers, royal officials, and the king himself. The journey symbolized the renewal of divine power, reaffirming the king's right to rule. And there were many more. The Egyptian calendar included at least 20 major religious festivals, and countless local ones. Some honored the rising of Sirius, others the flooding of the Nile. Some were quiet and internal, others wild and loud. Not all festivals were grand. Some were private affairs, a ritual celebrated by a single household in their personal shrine. Others involved the entire village gathering at a local temple, offering baskets of dates, onions, and bread. And still others were deeply emotional. One festival, known as the Feast of the Wailing Women, commemorated the mourning of Isis and Nephthys over the dead Osiris. Women would gather to sing laments, beat their chests, and pour libations of water onto the ground. It was an act of grief and rebirth, of honoring death so that life could continue. These festivals weren't just religious, they were community events. For many Egyptians, these were the only times they would see the god statue, or enter the outer courts of a great temple. They would bring petitions, pray for health, ask for fertility, or seek justice. Some wore amulets, others made offerings. And some simply came to be in the presence of something larger than themselves. Food was shared. Beer flowed freely. Music echoed across plazas. Dancers spun in circles, their anklets jingling, their faces beaming with joy. And through it all, the god watched, hidden behind veils and gold, carried on shoulders, sailing on sacred waters, listening to the voices of his people. When the festival ended, the god statue was returned to the sanctuary. The doors closed. The silence returned. But something lingered in the hearts of the people, the belief that for a moment, the gods had walked among them. In the next segment, we will travel to an even more secluded place, the inner secrets of temple rituals, the magic that was hidden from both the crowd and the casual visitor. There, we will explore spells, symbols, and ceremonies known only to the highest initiates of Egypt's sacred houses. Now, allow your mind to float gently deeper, beyond the stone gateways, past the great hypostyle halls, through the incense-laden air of the main sanctuary, into a place almost no mortal ever saw. This is the inner sanctum. The naos, as it was called, was the holiest chamber of the temple, sealed off from the world, shrouded in mystery, built to house the very presence of the god. Here, in a room smaller than you might expect, often no larger than a modest chamber, stood a shrine of stone or gilded wood. It had a door, sometimes sealed with clay and marked with the pharaoh's insignia. Inside was a statue, not large, not towering, but compact and sacred, often no taller than a person's forearm. This statue was no mere sculpture. It was the body of the god on earth. And the rituals performed here were unlike anything else in Egyptian religion, not public, not symbolic, but personal and deeply sacred. These were not gestures for show. They were a daily communion between the divine and the priesthood. Each morning began in complete silence. Before the sun even rose, the first priest entered the temple, walking barefoot, his body ritually cleansed, his breath fresh with natron. He walked slowly, torch in hand, alone in the stillness. He whispered prayers to awaken the god. When he reached the sanctuary, he would unlock the doors, sometimes using a series of keys and sacred words, and swing open the great doors of the naos. The statue was unveiled. And so began a routine that was astonishing in its intimacy. The priest would speak to the god, gently, respectfully, often using poetic invocations. He would tell the god that he had come, that the day had begun, that it was time to awaken and receive care. Then he would wash the statue, using purified water, soft cloths, and sacred oils. The same way you might care for a sleeping child or an honored elder, he bathed the statue gently and lovingly. He would anoint it with fragrant myrrh, sacred balms, or imported perfumes. He would then dress the statue, placing upon it fine linens, sometimes multiple layers, and adorning it with jewelry, amulets, or small crowns. As he worked, he recited specialized hymns, known as daily liturgies, poetic praises that addressed the god by dozens of names, each tied to a different aspect of nature, power, or cosmic principle. Once dressed, the god was offered food. But not just any food. The priests would prepare full meals, small loaves of bread, fresh vegetables, meats, beer, and sometimes wine. These were placed carefully on altars near the statue. The god was invited to consume the spiritual essence of the meal, which was believed to nourish the divine form. After a respectful pause, sometimes involving chant or music, the food was removed. Later, It would be consumed by the temple staff or redistributed, though the god was said to have already taken its divine essence. The priest would then perform protective rituals, such as fumigating the chamber with incense, or drawing magical symbols with natron to ward off evil. He might sprinkle water in the shape of a protective loop, or whisper hidden names of power. Finally, the statue was reclothed in its night garments, sealed inside its shrine, and the doors were closed again, sometimes with wax, sometimes with rope, always with a whispered prayer. The entire sequence could take hours. And yet, it happened every single day, in temples across Egypt, from the grand halls of Karnak to the remote shrines of desert oases. But not everyone could perform these rites. Only the highest-ranking priests, those with years of training, initiation into the temple's most secret texts, and a life of ritual purity, were permitted to enter the naos. These were men who had studied the sacred books of the temple libraries, books that no ordinary person ever saw. Some were written in cursive hieratic script, others in the mysterious demotic. Many were passed down orally, never written at all. They contained instructions not just for ritual, but for cosmic maintenance. You see, in Egyptian belief, the gods weren't passive. They weren't abstract. They needed to be nourished, adored, and honored, not out of vanity, but because they were the fuel behind the order of the universe. If the rituals ceased, the world would begin to unravel. The Nile might not rise. Crops might fail. Enemies might invade. The stars might even lose their paths across the sky. So, these private rituals weren't optional, they were essential. And yet, they were hidden. The average Egyptian never saw them. Even many temple workers, scribes, gardeners, bakers, never entered the sanctuary. To them, the god's presence was felt, but never fully seen. This secrecy created an air of mystery and awe. When people looked at the towering pylons of a temple or watched the festivals in the streets, they might cheer and celebrate, but always with a tinge of respectful distance. Because deep inside, hidden from view, the true heart of the divine pulsed, tended by hands they would never witness. And this idea, that the divine must be both close and hidden, both among the people and set apart, was at the very core of Egypt's spiritual life. In the next segment, we will move from the sanctity of the shrine to the work of the sacred scribes, the keepers of Egypt's temple texts, calendars, and divine words, those who gave language to the will of the gods. Let yourself float now, slowly, into segment 11, where ink meets papyrus and magic is written in symbols. Let us now drift from the sacred hush of the inner sanctuary to another, quieter chamber. One filled not with incense and statues, but with the soft scratch of reed pens on papyrus, the rustle of linen garments, and the calm concentration of minds at work. Here, in the shaded chambers of the temple libraries and scriptoriums, sat the scribes, keepers of sacred knowledge, and silent partners in the daily rituals of the gods. In ancient Egypt, scribes were not merely writers. They were guardians of cosmic memory. They carried within their ink-stained hands the power to record, preserve, and sometimes even influence the will of the divine. The Egyptians believed that words, especially written words, had immense power. Once inscribed, a word took on a life of its own. It could summon spirits, command the elements, heal the sick, or protect the dead. That belief made the scribes' profession sacred. Temple scribes were more than bureaucrats. They were theologians, poets, mathematicians, astronomers, and ritual specialists. Many had begun training as children, sometimes as young as 5 or 6, learning to copy simple hieroglyphs on potsherds or shards of limestone, known as ostraca. As they advanced, they moved on to papyrus, the sacred writing surface made from the stalks of the papyrus plant. It was light, flexible, and expensive, used only for official and sacred texts. Inside the temple complex, scribes kept meticulous records of everything: ritual schedules, temple inventory, priestly rosters, offerings made to the gods, omens, star charts, festival plans, and sacred hymns. They composed and copied religious texts, hymns of praise, litanies, magical spells, and the complex ritual calendars that told the priests which incantations to say on which day, which gods to honor, and how the changing of the seasons should shape temple life. But their most important job was maintaining the daily ritual texts. These were extensive, carefully ordered sequences of prayers and actions, like liturgical scripts, that guided every motion of the priest in the sanctuary. They had to be precise. A wrong word or misstep in a ritual might, it was feared, disrupt the balance between order and chaos. To protect against such errors, scribes often worked in teams. Some copied existing texts by hand, while others cross-checked them for accuracy. Still others maintained House of Life libraries, special collections of sacred books, magical lore, and healing knowledge, often hidden deep within the temple's secure chambers. Some of these books were believed to contain secret spells for protection, resurrection, or communing with gods. Others recorded astronomical data, star movements, solar calendars, lunar cycles, which the Egyptians relied on to time their festivals and rituals with cosmic precision. The scribes also recorded dreams, omens, and oracles, interpreting them through established systems and writing them into permanent records for priests or even pharaohs to consult. Despite this powerful role, temple scribes lived modestly. Their garments were simple white linen. They carried wooden palettes with ink cakes, black for standard text, red for important words or titles. Their pens were thin, chewed reeds, their ink a mixture of soot, ochre, and water. Many scribes worked in silence, save for the occasional whisper or prayer. Writing was a meditative act, and many believed the gods themselves guided the scribe's hand. To write sacred words was to touch something divine. Some scribes even claimed divine patronage, especially from Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing, wisdom, and time. His image adorned many of their texts. In their eyes, he was the original scribe, the one who wrote the laws of the universe before the world was even born. In that way, every time a temple scribe dipped their reed into ink, they were reenacting a divine act, bringing order from silence, permanence from breath, thought from mystery. The role of the scribe extended beyond life itself. In tombs across Egypt, scribes were buried with their palettes and inkstones, as if ready to continue their work in the next world. Some were even granted special funerary texts, prayers to Thoth to aid them in judging souls or recording the deeds of the dead. And so, tucked in the quiet corners of massive temples, beneath colonnades, and behind towering pylons, Egypt's scribes worked in shadow and light, preserving the language of the gods, shaping the rituals that held the world together, and keeping memory alive. It was thanks to them that so much of what we know today has survived. Because they believed that words could endure beyond stone. And they were right. As we continue into segment 12, we'll shift from parchment to pavement, exploring how temples managed economic power, from granaries and breweries to livestock pens and markets. For now, let yourself gently drift on the whisper of a scribe's pen as we turn the page to the next part of our journey. As you rest deeper into stillness, we step out of the hush of the scribe's chamber and into the sunlight of the temple courtyards, where the sacred intersects with the practical, and where the economic pulse of ancient Egypt beats beneath layers of ritual and divinity. Temples were not just places of prayer and incense, they were economic engines. In fact, some of the largest temples in Egypt, like the sprawling complex at Karnak, employed thousands of people, controlled vast tracts of farmland, and managed production centers that rivaled those of small cities. To the Egyptians, this was not a contradiction. There was no strict division between the sacred and the mundane. Managing grain silos, crafting jewelry, overseeing cattle herds, these were all seen as divine duties, necessary to keep the temple functioning and the gods properly honored. Let's begin with the lifeblood of ancient Egyptian economy, grain. temples often controlled enormous agricultural estates. These lands were worked by tenant farmers, seasonal laborers, and sometimes temple staff. After the annual inundation of the Nile, when the waters receded and left behind rich black silt, the fields were planted with barley, wheat, flax, and vegetables. Harvests were brought directly to the temple's granaries, which were large mud brick buildings designed to store and preserve grain year-round. These granaries served multiple purposes, feeding temple staff, providing offerings for rituals, and serving as currency, since grain was often used in place of money. Each temple kept careful records of how much grain was sown, reaped, stored, and distributed. These figures were often overseen by a high-ranking priest economist, who might carry the title of overseer of the granaries of the Lord of the Two Lands. Beyond agriculture, temples also managed herds of livestock. Cattle, goats, sheep, and geese were kept in pens nearby. These animals provided meat for temple feasts and rituals, leather for clothing and bindings, and bones for tool-making. Offerings to the gods often included roast duck or freshly slaughtered bulls, especially during festivals. But temples didn't just consume, they produced. Many temples had their own workshops, where skilled artisans crafted goods from gold, copper, linen, and stone. There were metalworkers, potters, weavers, and perfume makers. Jewelry was made from imported lapis lazuli and turquoise, while alabaster was carved into elegant offering vessels. These items were often placed in the inner sanctuaries or used in processions, but sometimes they were traded either with other temples or with foreign merchants, contributing to Egypt's international economy. Temples also brewed beer and pressed wine, especially for religious celebrations. Beer, made from fermented barley bread, was a staple of daily life and temple rituals alike. Wine, though more expensive, was often associated with luxury and used in offerings to gods like Hathor and Osiris. In some temples, grapevines grew on sacred plots tended by dedicated gardeners. All of this activity required management. Temples were divided into bureaucratic sections, each overseen by an official or priest. There were accountants for grain, scribes for livestock, supervisors for workshops, and guards to protect stores. Every item, from a single basket of figs to an ornate golden shrine, was counted, catalogued, and stored in ledgers, often in triplicate. The temple was, in many ways, a miniature state. It had its own labor force, budget, revenue streams, and trade networks. Some temples even loaned grain to nearby villages, or offered food relief during years of poor harvest. In times of political instability, temples might step in to manage disputes, distribute resources, or protect sacred lands from encroachment. And all of this, from sowing wheat to counting oxen, was wrapped in the language of piety. It wasn't just commerce, it was cosmic order. By managing wealth wisely, the priests were honoring Ma'at, the principle of balance and harmony. In their view, even accounting was a form of worship. Sometimes, taxes collected by the state were funneled directly to temples, especially under kings who were building new sanctuaries or expanding old ones. In return, temples offered prayers for the king's health, prosperity, and long reign. Over centuries, some temples became immensely powerful, rivaling the authority of pharaohs themselves. The Temple of Amun at Karnak, for example, once owned tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of ships, and commanded its own private army. This wealth wasn't always stable. At various points in history, rulers would strip temples of land, limit priestly power, or seize treasure to fund wars. And yet, the temple economy endured, fluid, adaptive, and always connected to the sacred. It was a system in which spiritual devotion and daily survival were entwined, where a field of wheat could feed both stomach and soul, and where every jar of oil or roll of linen had a place in the divine order. As you gently drift through this vision of temple life, with sun-warmed courtyards and the soft shuffle of sandals in granaries, allow your thoughts to settle into the peaceful rhythm of a world where every act was sacred, even the harvesting of grain. In segment 13, we will turn toward the community outside the temple walls, examining how ordinary people interacted with these grand sanctuaries, and what they hoped to gain by approaching their gods. For now, let the temple rest in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, its wealth humming silently beneath the surface, as the wheels of the sacred economy continue to turn. As your breath settles and the stillness around you deepens, imagine standing quietly at the edge of a temple's open courtyard, not as a priest or a scribe, but as a common villager, dusty from the road, clasping a small offering in your hands. This is where we begin our exploration of how everyday Egyptians interacted with their temples, not as insiders, but as seekers, pilgrims, farmers, artisans, and mothers, each approaching the gods with hope, fear, gratitude, or grief. Though temples were towering, controlled environments with rituals shrouded in layers of sacred secrecy, they were not closed off from society. On the contrary, they were embedded in it. In every region of Egypt, from bustling Memphis to remote Thebes, temples functioned as both spiritual centers and community hubs. Many temples had outer courtyards and porticos that were open to the public, especially during feast days. People came not just to worship, but to be heard. They brought with them prayers, petitions, and gifts, simple objects of devotion like beads, food, small statues, or even handwritten pleas scratched on limestone flakes called ostraca. What did people ask the gods? The same things we ask today. A woman might pray for a safe birth. A farmer might ask for rain. A merchant might plead for protection on a long journey. A widow might ask for justice. Some came with desperate requests, others with humble thanks. All believed that the temple, this massive stone vessel of power, could carry their voices up to the ears of the gods. One of the most common ways to communicate with the divine was through intermediaries. Priests often served as spiritual go-betweens, reading the needs of the petitioner and performing small rituals on their behalf. These services were sometimes free, but often involved an offering, perhaps a jar of beer, a loaf of bread, or a scrap of copper. In some temples, there were even oracles. Statues of gods, carried in processions or kept in sanctuaries, that were believed to answer questions. A priest might pose a yes or no question, and the god, through subtle movements or ritual signs, would respond. This was especially popular during the New Kingdom. Temples of Amun, for example, became known for their divine consultations. Pilgrims would wait patiently outside the gates, hoping the god would accept their query. It wasn't always a formal process. Sometimes, people simply walked up to the walls and spoke their hearts aloud. They might whisper into cracks between the stones or leave small tokens in hidden nooks. Some even wrote graffiti, yes, holy graffiti, scratching praises or prayers to the gods into the very fabric of the temple walls. On major festival days, temples opened wide their gates, and entire towns surged in celebration. The air would fill with drumming, incense, music, and cheers. Sacred statues, dressed in linens and jewels, were carried in ornate boats or palanquins, paraded along riverbanks or through crowded streets. During these festivals, like the beautiful festival of the valley in Thebes, gods were said to emerge from the hidden world and walk among the people. It was a time of joy, feasting, and spiritual closeness. Offerings flowed freely, as did drink, laughter, and reverence. But there were also quieter moments, too. A grieving mother might stand alone at dawn, clutching a piece of bread to leave at the foot of a shrine. A young man might kneel beneath the stars, lighting a tiny flame before a statue of Thoth, hoping for wisdom before an examination. A farmer might whisper to Osiris as he sowed his field nearby, offering part of the harvest in advance for a good yield. Many people believed that healing could come from the temple. Some slept overnight in sanctuary courtyards, a practice known as incubation, hoping for dreams in which the god would appear and offer advice, or even a cure. These dream temples, particularly those dedicated to Imhotep or Serket, were places of fragile hope, where suffering met sacred mystery. Temples also played a role in justice. Though not courts in the modern sense, some temples maintained records of legal decisions, hosted scribes who documented complaints, and witnessed sworn oaths. People might come to temples to settle property disputes, report theft, or make solemn vows under the watchful eyes of the gods. This blurring of spiritual and civic life meant that temples became more than just religious buildings, they were woven into the rhythm of everyday existence. They were places where births were celebrated, where prayers for crops were planted alongside seeds, and where death was not feared but faced with reverence and ritual. And so the grand stone temples of Egypt, though majestic and vast, were also intimate in their way. They carried the hopes and anxieties of countless individuals, scribbled, sung, whispered, and poured out like oil upon sacred altars. As you rest in this gentle twilight of ancient voices, picture yourself among them, not as an outsider, but as one of many souls who dared to knock gently at the doors of eternity, hoping for a whisper in return. In segment 14, we'll walk deeper into time and consider how these temples changed across dynasties, how politics, invasions, and reform reshaped their structure, meaning, and survival. But for now, let yourself sink into the quiet hush of temple shadows, where pilgrims pass softly and prayers rise like breath into the waiting stillness of the gods. Let your breath deepen once more, as the desert breeze slows to a whisper. Imagine the sun rising over the Nile, again and again, for thousands of years. As the shadows shift and centuries pass, the temples that once stood firm begin to change, not crumble just yet, but subtly evolve, reflecting the ever-shifting tides of Egyptian politics, religion, and foreign influence. In this segment, we gently trace the transformations of these monumental temples as they journeyed through dynasties, upheaval, and occupation. The earliest temples, from Egypt's Old Kingdom, were relatively modest. Built from mud brick, they resembled enclosed shrines, more humble than the grand sanctuaries that would follow. Their design focused heavily on honoring the dead, especially the pharaoh, as seen in sun temples dedicated to Ra. By the Middle Kingdom, temples began to grow more intricate. Stone replaced brick. Walls grew taller. Sacred geometry and symmetrical layouts became more common. This period also saw the rise of provincial temples, built far from the royal capitals, showing how divine worship was decentralizing and becoming more widespread. Then came the New Kingdom, a golden era of temple building. This was the time of Amun-Ra's supremacy, and his temples reflected it. The massive complex at Karnak, with its towering hypostyle hall and obelisks, was a direct result of the power wielded by both Amun's priesthood and the pharaohs who supported them. It was in this era that temples became not only religious sanctuaries but also symbols of imperial power. They were the stage for grand processions, battle commemorations, and monumental propaganda. The Temple of Luxor, for instance, was linked to Karnak by a grand avenue of sphinxes and served as the centerpiece for the Opit festival, where the king was ritually reborn. Pharaohs like Seti I, Ramses II, and Hatshepsut left their mark through colossal temples with inscriptions proclaiming divine favor and military might. These were not quiet places, they were bustling, administrative hubs with storerooms, libraries, and courts. But not all change came peacefully. In the 14th century BCE, Pharaoh Akhenaten initiated a dramatic religious revolution. he dismantled many traditional temples, shut down the cult of Amun, and built new temples dedicated solely to Aten, the sun disk. These temples were open-roofed, bathed in sunlight, and very different from the dark sanctuaries of old. This radical shift, however, was short-lived. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt returned to its traditional deities, and Amun's temples were restored. Still, this episode revealed just how vulnerable temples were to the whims of politics and belief. As Egypt moved into the late period, it faced invasions and occupations by Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and eventually Persians. Each of these powers left their mark, but temples remained central, often used as symbols of continuity and stability. The Ptolemaic period, when Greek rulers controlled Egypt, brought another fascinating shift. Ptolemaic kings, like Ptolemy II and Ptolemy XII, commissioned grand temples in the traditional Egyptian style, even as they spoke Greek and honored Hellenistic gods in other contexts. Why? Because temples were essential for legitimacy. To rule Egypt, even as foreigners, they needed the support of the priesthood and the people. And so they continued building temples, such as the beautifully preserved Temple of Horus at Edfu, with its towering pylons and deeply carved reliefs. These temples retained their classical structure, pylon, courtyard, hypostyle hall, sanctuary, but the inscriptions had changed. Where once the pharaoh was depicted smiting enemies and offering incense, now the same scenes were repeated with Greek names inserted, Ptolemy instead of Ramses, Cleopatra instead of Nefertari. Temples also became centers of learning. The famous House of Life, a kind of scribal school and library, was often attached to major temples. Here, sacred texts, healing rituals, and astrological charts were copied and preserved. But the cracks had begun to show. As the Roman Empire absorbed Egypt in the 1st century BCE, temple life continued, at least for a while. Romans like Emperor Augustus built or renovated temples to curry favor with Egyptian priests. But gradually, the role of temples began to shrink. The rise of Christianity in the 4th century CE marked a final turning point. Temples were declared pagan. Worship was banned. Many temples were abandoned, repurposed as churches, or systematically defaced. Statues were destroyed, names of gods chiseled away, sanctuaries left empty. The sacred hieroglyphs, once so full of life and reverence, fell silent. And yet, even in this decline, temples continued to echo with meaning. Locals still whispered stories about the gods. Old rituals lingered as folk customs. And the stone walls, though weathered by time and conquest, refused to fall completely. Some temples became ruins, others quarries. Some were buried beneath villages, others preserved by desert sands. But almost all continued to inspire awe, long after their last priest had vanished. In the next and final content segment, segment 15, we'll reflect on how these ancient temples were rediscovered in the modern era, excavated stone by stone, and what they teach us today about the beliefs, fears, and aspirations of one of the world's most enduring civilizations. For now, breathe in the weight of centuries. Let the layers of history wrap around you like linen bandages, snug and still, each temple rising and falling like the pulse of Egypt itself. Now, with time stretching quietly behind us like the Nile at dusk, let us move from the deep past toward the present. From hieroglyph-covered halls once filled with incense and chanting, to silent stones buried beneath centuries of sand and memory. Egyptian temples did not disappear. They slept. And in their sleep, they became part of legend, rumor, and curiosity, until, slowly, they were rediscovered by the modern world. Our story now unfolds not through pharaohs or priests, but through explorers, archaeologists, and travelers who wandered the Egyptian deserts with notebooks and shovels, dreaming of the gods that once reigned there. By the time of the 18th century, European travelers were growing increasingly enchanted by Egypt. but their knowledge of the ancient civilization was limited and filled with imagination. Many believed temples were tombs. Some thought they had been built by giants or lost civilizations. Stories swirled around the remnants of Karnak, Luxor, and Edfu, part truth, part fantasy. Then came Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in 1798, which, although a military endeavor, was accompanied by a remarkable team of scholars and artists. These men carefully documented Egypt's monuments, compiling drawings, measurements, and detailed observations in what would become the Description de l'Egypte. This monumental work stirred a wave of Egyptomania across Europe. People were fascinated by sphinxes, sarcophagi, and especially by the grand temples, whose mystery seemed to defy time itself. But there was still one enormous barrier to understanding them: the language. Without the ability to read hieroglyphs, the stories carved into temple walls remained locked away. That changed dramatically in 1822, when Jean-François Champollion, using the Rosetta Stone, finally cracked the code of hieroglyphic writing. Suddenly, the temple spoke again. For the first time in over 1,000 years, we could read the prayers, hymns, and inscriptions left by the priests and kings of ancient Egypt. Temples were no longer mute ruins, they became libraries filled with living stories. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists began major excavation campaigns. The Temple of Abydos, for example, was slowly uncovered from under a village. Its exquisite reliefs, depicting Pharaoh Seti presenting offerings to a long list of gods, stunned scholars with their detail and artistry. At Dendera, the temple dedicated to Hathor was cleared of centuries of debris and soot. Travelers marveled at the blue ceiling filled with golden stars and the famous zodiac relief, which seemed to link Egypt with the heavens themselves. And of course, there was Abu Simbel, that immense temple carved into the cliffs of Nubia by Ramses II. By the mid-20th century, it faced destruction due to the construction of the Aswan High Dam. In an unprecedented international effort led by UNESCO, the temple was cut into massive blocks, moved, and reassembled higher on the mountain to save it from the rising waters of Lake Nasser. It was a feat that Ramses himself might have admired. Many other temples were not as lucky. Some lie in ruins, some remain partially buried, and some were destroyed long ago. But in each case, even the smallest fragment, an offering table, a piece of wall, a statue's base, adds a new brushstroke to the canvas of ancient Egyptian life. Today, these temples are protected heritage sites. Visitors walk their ancient avenues, photographing the same carvings once lit by oil lamps. Researchers use satellite imaging and 3D scanning to record and study them in ways their builders could never have imagined. And yet, the awe remains. To stand in a temple like Karnak or Philae, even in modern times, is to step into a timeless space. The heat, the silence, the towering stone columns, the subtle scent of history, it all combines to create a place that feels suspended between earth and sky. And here's something gently remarkable. The beliefs that built these temples may be gone, but the human desire to connect with something sacred, something eternal, still lingers. People from every country and background come not just to observe, but to reflect, to imagine, to feel. Just as the ancient Egyptians believed temples were places of creation and rebirth, so too do many modern visitors find in them a sense of stillness, humility, and perspective. From their very beginnings as mud brick shrines to their status as modern wonders, these temples have endured. They are not just ruins. They are survivors. Guardians of memory. Whispers of a civilization that dreamed in stone. And reminders that even the passage of thousands of years cannot erase the power of a place built for gods. So now, dear listener, allow your thoughts to rest gently among those stone halls. Let your mind wander the colonnades, where sunlight dances through dust, and time is measured not in seconds, but in heartbeats. May your dreams tonight be carved in the soft rhythm of temple walls, and your sleep as deep and ancient as the sands of Egypt.